There's a kind of loneliness nobody talks about. It isn't the loneliness of living alone. I know that one. I've lived in the same house on Peachtree Street for 47 years, and the last 9 of those without my husband Harold. No, the loneliness I mean is different, sharper, quieter. It's the loneliness of sitting in a room full of the people you love most in this world, and slowly realizing they stopped seeing you a long time ago. Let me tell you when I knew. It was Thanksgiving, last November. I was standing in my son's kitchen in Buckhead, holding a sweet potato pie I had baked from 5 o'clock that morning, the same recipe my mother-in-law Beatrice gave me in 1978, written on the back of a church bulletin in her shaky handwriting. The crust was still warm through the glass dish. I could smell the brown sugar and the nutmeg and that little bit of bourbon I always add when nobody's looking. I walked into the kitchen and said, "Darius, honey, where do you want me to put this?" My son didn't turn around. He was laughing at something his father-in-law said about the Falcons. My daughter-in-law Vanessa was arranging crystal on the dining table. My granddaughter Amara was sitting on the floor showing her other grandmother a drawing. Nobody turned around. I stood there for maybe 15 seconds, holding that pie. And I want you to understand, nobody was being cruel. Nobody hated me. The room was warm and full of laughter and the smell of roasted turkey, and I was in it, and I was not in it. Both things were true at the same time. I set the pie down on the counter next to the microwave. I stood there another moment, and then I went to use the powder room, and I closed the door, and I sat on the edge of the tub, and I did not cry. I just sat there, and I thought to myself, Gloria, how long has this been happening? How long have you been disappearing? That's what I want to tell you about. Not the Thanksgiving. That was just the day I finally saw it. I want to tell you about the years before. How a mother becomes invisible to her own son. How it happens so slowly you can't point to when it started. How the woman you were, the woman your husband loved, the woman who raised a boy into a man, the woman who stood at the front of a third-grade classroom for 38 years and taught other people's children to read. How that woman can vanish from her own life one small kindness at a time. Let me tell you how it started. Not with the Thanksgiving, with the magnolia tree. My name is Gloria Whitfield. I'm 70 years old. I was born in 1956 in a small wooden house in Macon, Georgia, the third of 4 children, the only girl. My father, Elijah, worked at the railroad. My mother, Rose, cleaned houses in the white neighborhoods and took in sewing at night. We did not have much, but my mother had a way of making a pot of collards and a pan of cornbread feel like Sunday dinner at the governor's house. I met Harold Whitfield in 1974 at Spelman College, where I was studying to be a teacher. He was at Morehouse studying engineering. He saw me at a church picnic, and he walked right up to me and he said, "Miss, I don't know your name yet, but I'm going to marry you." I laughed in his face. I told him my mother taught me not to talk to foolish men. He said, "Then I will be patient until I become a wise one." We were married 2 years later. Harold was a quiet man. He was not a man who said I love you every day. He was a man who fixed the leaky faucet before you mentioned it. Who warmed your car up in the winter before you went to work? Who put a fresh rose from the yard on your nightstand every Saturday morning for 40 years without fail? We bought our house on Peachtree Street in 1978. A 2-story red brick with a wide porch and a magnolia tree out front that Harold planted the year we got married. He dug the hole himself. He stood there in his Sunday shoes with mud up to his ankles, and he said, "Glory." That's what he called me, Glory. "This tree will outlive both of us, and every April when you see it bloom, you remember that I love you." That magnolia bloomed every April for 47 years. White petals the size of my hand. You could smell it from the driveway. We tried for a baby for 9 years. 9 years of hoping and praying and sitting in doctors' offices and crying in bathroom stalls. I had 2 miscarriages. After the second one, I told Harold maybe God didn't want us to be parents. Harold held my hand and he said, "Glory, God don't do hurry. When the baby comes, he will come." And he did. Darius Elijah Whitfield, born April 14th, 1984, on a Saturday morning while the magnolia tree was in full bloom. I remember Harold carrying him out to the front porch 2 days after we brought him home from the hospital, holding him up to the tree, whispering something I couldn't hear. Darius was a gentle boy, soft-spoken, thoughtful. He used to sit beside me on the back porch on Friday evenings when he was in high school, eating cornbread straight out of the pan, and he'd ask me to tell him the stories. His favorite was the one about his great-grandfather Isaiah, who walked 40 miles from Macon to Atlanta in 1965 to register to vote. Walked the whole way. Slept in a ditch one night when a truck full of white men came down the road. My grandfather never talked about it. I only knew because my mother told me, and I told Darius. He used to look at me when I told those stories and say, "Mama, you make me proud to be a Whitfield." I kept every report card, every drawing, every Mother's Day card he ever made me. There's a box in my closet upstairs, a shoebox, and inside is a crayon drawing he did in kindergarten of me and him holding hands under a yellow sun. At the top he wrote, in the wobbly letters of a 5-year-old, "My mama is the best lady in the world." I kept that drawing for 40 years. I still have it. I taught 3rd grade at Booker T. Washington Elementary for 38 years. I retired in 2013. Harold and I were going to travel. We were going to drive up the coast to Maine and eat lobster. We were going to see the Grand Canyon. We had a map on the refrigerator with little red pins in it. Harold had his stroke on a Tuesday morning in October 2015. He was in the kitchen pouring his coffee. He looked at me and he said, "Glory, something's not right." And then he sat down on the kitchen floor, and he never stood up again. He died 3 days later in Emory Hospital holding my hand. He was 63 years old. I buried him on a Saturday. It rained all day. And I came home to that empty house, and I sat on the edge of our bed, and I thought to myself, "Gloria, you are going to have to learn to live again. You are going to have to find something to hold." I held on to Darius. Maybe that was my first mistake, but I don't know how else a mother is supposed to grieve. Darius married Vanessa Holloway in May 2017, 18 months after his father died. I liked Vanessa from the first time I met her. She was a marketing director at a firm downtown, 30 years old at the time. Tall, sharp, beautiful in that way that certain women are. Not soft pretty, but architectural, like she was built on purpose. She came from a family in Buckhead. Her mother, Delphine, was a lawyer. Her father was an orthodontist. They had 2 vacation homes, one in Hilton Head and one in Martha's Vineyard. I wanted to give Darius and Vanessa something real for their wedding, not just an envelope. I spent 4 months sewing a ceremonial cloth by hand, real Kente cloth I ordered from a weaver in Accra, pieced together with gold thread, with both of their initials embroidered at the corners. My mother had made one for me and Harold. Her mother made one for her. It was supposed to go in their home, supposed to be there when they had children, supposed to be something Amara would inherit someday. I gave it to them wrapped in tissue paper. Vanessa hugged me. She said, "Mom Whitfield, this is beautiful. Thank you so much." Darius teared up. He kissed my forehead and he said, "Mama, Daddy would have loved this." I never saw that cloth again. Not hung in their house, not folded in a closet I ever opened. I don't know where it went. I never asked. That should have told me something. But I wasn't looking yet. Amara was born in the spring of 2019. I was in the waiting room at Piedmont Hospital with my Bible on my lap and my hands shaking. When Darius came out and said, "Mama, it's a girl," I cried in a way I hadn't cried since Harold died. A good cry. A full cry. I held that baby for the first time 4 hours later, and I looked down at her little face, her father's chin, her mother's long eyelashes, and I whispered, "Hey there, little one. I'm your Grandma Gloria, and I am going to love you for the rest of my life." For the first 2 years of Amara's life, I drove out to their house 3 days a week to help with her. Vanessa went back to work 6 weeks after the birth, and I wanted to be useful. I wanted to be close. I loved that baby like she was my own starting over. I sang to her. The same songs I used to sing to Darius. "His eye is on the sparrow." "Precious Lord, take my hand." "This little light of mine." Old gospel songs my mother sang to me. One afternoon, Vanessa came home from work early and heard me singing Amazing Grace to Amara in the nursery. She stood in the doorway listening. Then she smiled this careful smile and she said, "Mom Whitfield, that's beautiful. But can we save the religious songs until she's a little older? Darius and I want her to choose her own path, when she's old enough to understand." I said, "Of course, baby. Whatever you want." And I stopped singing those songs out loud. I sang them in my head instead. Every time I held her, I sang them without moving my lips. Because Amara deserved to hear what her great-great-grandmother had sung to her babies in a sharecropper's cabin in 1918. She deserved to feel those songs in her bones, even if she didn't know the words. That was what I told myself. But I never sang them out loud in that house again. Small thing? I told myself it was a small thing. It was not a small thing. I know that now. In the summer of 2020, the world went sideways. The pandemic shut everything down. Vanessa was worried about Amara catching something. She asked me, kindly, carefully, if I could stop coming to the house for a while, just for a few months, until things settled. I said, of course. I said I understood. I said Amara's safety came first. A few months became 6 months, became a year. Darius called me every week at first, then every 2 weeks, then once a month. The calls were short. He was tired, working from home with a toddler. I understood. I did. I told myself I understood. I started leaving longer voicemails because nobody picked up anymore. I'd call on a Sunday afternoon and the phone would ring 4 times and go to his voicemail, and I'd stand in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and say, "Hey son, it's your mama, just checking in. Weather's been nice here. The magnolia bloomed early this year. Call me when you get a chance. Love you." He'd text back 2 days later, "Love you too, mama, crazy busy." One afternoon, I remember this clearly because it was a Tuesday in March 2021, and I was wiping down the kitchen counter. He called me. He was driving. The car's Bluetooth was on. He didn't realize I could hear everything in the car, clear as a bell. Vanessa was in the passenger seat. I could hear her folding something. Maybe a receipt. She said quietly as if she didn't know the call had connected yet, "Why does your mother keep calling? There's nothing to even say. It's like she just calls to call." Darius paused. 3 seconds. I counted them. Then he said, "I know, babe. I'll handle it." Then he noticed the call had connected. He said brightly, "Hey, Mama. How are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm fine, baby. You busy? I'll let you go." I hung up. I stood in my kitchen and I stared at the phone, and I felt something I had never felt before in my life. Not anger, not grief. Embarrassment. I was embarrassed to have called my own son. I want you to sit with that for a minute, because I have sat with it for a long time. A 70-year-old woman who carried that boy in her body for 9 months, who sat up all night when he had croup, who sold her own wedding ring 1 year to pay for his SAT prep course. That woman was embarrassed to call her son on a Tuesday afternoon just to say hello. That was the day I stopped calling first. I told myself I was giving them space. I told myself I was being a good mother-in-law, a modern grandmother, not one of those old women who clings and suffocates. I told myself I was being strong. I was not being strong. I was disappearing. And the saddest part is nobody noticed I had started to go. Harold used to say that the biggest lie we tell ourselves is that love is about being useful. He'd say it over his morning coffee, reading the paper, shaking his head at something he'd read. "Glory," he'd say, "people get that twisted. They think if they just do enough, give enough, sacrifice enough, then people will love them. But love ain't a transaction. Love is just seeing somebody and letting them see you back." I nodded when he said it. I thought I agreed. But when he died, I forgot. I forgot everything he taught me. Because grief makes you stupid, and love makes you stupid. And the combination of the two makes a woman do things she would never advise her own daughter to do. I started paying for things. Not because they asked. They never asked. Vanessa came from money. They didn't need my money. But I wanted to contribute. I wanted to feel like I had a place at that table. So when Amara was born, I paid off the hospital bill. $12,000 that their insurance didn't cover. I didn't tell them. I just called the hospital and paid it. When Darius mentioned the bill later, I said, "Oh, don't worry about that, baby. I took care of it." He said, "Mama, you didn't have to do that." I said I wanted to. And he let me. That was the shape of it. For years. Little things. A check here. A gift there. I paid for Amara's preschool enrollment deposit. I paid for the landscaping when they bought the house. I paid for Vanessa's mother's birthday gift 1 year when Darius forgot. I was not being foolish with my money. Harold left me well taken care of, and my teacher's pension was solid, and the house was paid off. But I was being foolish with my heart, because every check I wrote was a letter that said, "Please don't forget me," and every letter was sent to an address where nobody was reading the mail. The spring of 2023 was when Delphine moved to Atlanta. Vanessa's mother, 66 years old, recently divorced, looking for a fresh start, as she told it, bought a condo in Buckhead, 3 miles from Darius and Vanessa's house. She started coming over on Sundays. She started picking Amara up from preschool. She took Amara to the Georgia Aquarium. She took her to the High Museum. She bought her a $300 Easter dress at Neiman Marcus and posted a photo on Facebook that said "My sweet Amara" with her grandma on the caption. I saw the photo on Facebook, at the kitchen table, in my quiet house on Peachtree Street, holding my coffee in the blue ceramic pot. I looked at that caption for a long time. Grandma. A week later, I was at their house for Sunday dinner, one of the rare ones I was invited to, and Amara came running into the living room and threw her arms around Delphine's legs and said, "Grandma, Grandma, look what I made." Then she turned to me, smiled politely, and said, "Hi, Nana." Nana. I smiled. I said, "Hi, sugar. Come give Nana a hug." She did. She was 4 years old. She didn't know what she had done. She didn't know there was anything to do. She was just using the names she'd been taught. Later, when Amara was in the other room, I said, carefully, casually, "Darius, honey, when did we start calling me Nana?" Darius looked up from his phone. He said, "Oh, I don't know, Mama. It just sort of happened." Vanessa grew up calling Delphine's mother Nana, and Delphine was already grandma to Vanessa, so I guess that's just how it shook out for Amara. I said, "I see." He said, "Is that okay? I mean, it's just a name." I said, "Of course, baby. It's fine." And I meant it. In the moment, I meant it. But that night, driving home down Peachtree Street, past the magnolia trees blooming along the median, I pulled the car over to the side of the road and I turned off the engine, and I put my head down on the steering wheel, and I said out loud, to nobody, to Harold, to God, to myself, "She got my name. She got my grandchild's first word for me, and I gave it to her without a fight." "It's just a name," Darius said. "But a name is not just a name. A name is a place. A name is where you stand in somebody's life. And I had just been moved from the front row to the back. And nobody had even told me I was moving. The year Delphine moved to Atlanta was the year I started to understand what was happening to me. But understanding something and being able to stop it are two different things. And I could not stop it. I want to be honest about that. I saw it happening, and I let it happen, because the alternative, speaking up, making a scene, being the kind of mother-in-law who complains, felt worse than becoming invisible. I had been raised by women who did not complain. My mother Rose raised 4 children in a house with a leaky roof and never once said a word about it. My grandmother Pearl buried 2 babies before the age of 5 and kept getting up every morning to cook breakfast for her husband. The women in my family did not take up space with their pain. We took up space with our hands, with our cooking, with our cleaning, with our praying. Pain was private. Pain was something you swallowed down with your morning coffee and did not mention. I swallowed a lot of coffee in those years. Amara turned 5 in the spring of 2024. Her birthday party was on a Saturday afternoon in May, and I received the invitation through a group text message. The same group text that went to 18 other people, most of whom I didn't know. No phone call, no separate invitation. Just a text from Vanessa that said Amara's 5th birthday party. Saturday, May 11th, 2 p.m., Delphine's house in Buckhead. Theme is mermaids, with a little mermaid emoji at the end. I stared at that text for a long time before I replied. I wrote back, "Can't wait, I'll be there," with a heart emoji, because I had learned by then that emojis made things easier. Emojis were what young people used, and if I used them, maybe I would seem less like an old woman who didn't understand. I started making my gift the next morning. I drove down to the fabric store on Cascade Road, and I picked out the materials. Soft cotton in pink and teal, some gold thread, a packet of black seed beads for the eyes. I was going to make Amara a handmade mermaid doll, a real one, the kind my own mother had made for me when I was 6 years old, sitting at her sewing table after supper, working by the light of a single yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling of our kitchen in Macon. I worked on that doll for 3 weeks. I did not rush it. Every stitch was placed with purpose. I sewed a little seashell bikini out of scraps of gold satin I had saved from Harold's old necktie. I gave her dark brown skin the color of Amara's. I braided her hair with tiny pink ribbons. I embroidered a small heart on the inside of her tail, where nobody would see it, and inside the heart I sewed the initials AW for Gloria Whitfield. It was the most beautiful thing I had made in 20 years. I wrapped it in white tissue paper and put it in a gift bag with a handmade card that said, "For my Amara, with all my love, Nana." The party was at Delphine's house, as I had known it would be. Delphine had a pool. She had a 3-car garage. She had hired a company that set up a mermaid bounce house in the backyard, a mermaid face painting station, and a woman dressed in a full mermaid costume who sat in a kiddie pool and told stories to the children. There was a catered lunch. There was a 3-tiered pink cake from a bakery in Midtown that I later learned cost $800. I walked in with my gift bag and Vanessa kissed me on the cheek, and Darius said, "Hey, Mama, glad you made it." And Delphine floated over in a lavender sundress and said, "Gloria, honey, so good to see you. Help yourself to some sangria." I set my gift bag down on the gift table next to a pile of wrapped boxes that were taller than I was. My small bag with its hand-lettered tag looked like a sparrow in a room full of peacocks. Amara opened her gifts in the living room at 3:30. She sat on the floor in her little mermaid costume, and Vanessa handed her one gift at a time, and everybody clapped. The pony robot from Delphine. $800, I heard someone say. An American Girl doll from her father's cousin. A pink tablet from Vanessa's sister. A 3-foot-tall stuffed unicorn from somebody I didn't know. Vanessa handed her my gift bag. Amara pulled out the tissue paper. She pulled out the doll. She looked at it for a second, just a second, and then her eyes went to the unicorn on the other side of the room, and she said, "Mommy, can I play with the unicorn now?" Vanessa said, "Sure, honey. Say thank you to Nana." Amara said, "Thank you, Nana," without looking at me, and she dropped the doll on the carpet, and she ran to the unicorn. The doll lay on the carpet with its little gold seashell bikini and its braided hair and the heart I had sewn inside its tail. It lay there for the rest of the party. People stepped over it. Someone eventually kicked it by accident and it slid halfway under the couch. Nobody picked it up. I waited. I waited for Vanessa to notice. I waited for Darius to say, "Mama, let me put that somewhere safe." I waited for someone, anyone, to acknowledge that I had spent 3 weeks on that doll and it was now lying under a couch like a piece of trash. Nobody did. At the end of the party, when people were gathering their coats, I walked over to the couch. I got down on my knees, which is not easy when you are 68 years old with a bad hip, and I reached under the couch, and I pulled out the doll. I brushed the carpet fuzz off her braids. I folded her carefully into the tissue paper. I put her back in the gift bag. I put the gift bag in my purse. Nobody saw me do it. I drove home on the highway, and I did not cry. I went into my house, and I went up to my bedroom, and I put the gift bag on the top shelf of my closet, next to the shoebox that held Darius's old drawings. Someday I will give that doll to Amara, when she is older, when she can understand what it means, when she can understand that her Nana made it with her own hands in her quiet house, thinking about her. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I will keep it for myself. Because that doll is not just a doll anymore. It is a record. It is proof that I was there, that I tried, that my hands still worked, and my heart still worked, and I had not yet given up. The phone call happened in November 2024. I called Darius on a Saturday afternoon. I had a small thing to ask him. The furnace in the basement was making a rattling sound, and I wanted to know if he could come over and look at it before the cold weather set in. Harold had always handled things like that. Since Harold died, I had been trying to learn, but some things I still needed help with. Furnaces scared me. I was afraid of carbon monoxide. Darius picked up on the second ring. I heard the road noise in the background. He was driving. He was on Bluetooth again. I said, "Hey, baby, you busy?" He said, "Hey, Mama, I'm driving to the store with Vanessa. What's up?" I said, "Oh, it's nothing urgent. The furnace is making a noise, and I wondered if you could swing by sometime this week and take a look." He said, "Yeah, of course. Let me call you back when I get home, okay?" I said, "Okay, baby." But I didn't hang up, and he didn't hang up. The call stayed connected, and I heard what happened next. Vanessa in the passenger seat, sighing. What did she want? Darius, "Furnace is making a noise. She wants me to come look at it." Vanessa, "Darius, seriously, we just talked about this." Darius, "I know, babe." Vanessa, "Every single week there's something. It's the furnace, it's the roof, it's the garbage disposal. I feel bad saying it, but it's like, she calls because she wants you over there. The furnace is just the excuse." Darius, "I know." Vanessa, softer now. "Baby, I'm not trying to be cruel. I know you love your mother. I love her too. But we have our own family now. We have Amara. We have our own life. And she keeps trying to pull you back into being her little boy. You're 42 years old. You have to put some distance there, for your sake, for our sake." Darius, after a long pause, "You're right. Vanessa. I'm sorry. I know this is hard. Darius. No, you're right. She's from a different generation. She doesn't understand boundaries. I'll handle it. I held the phone against my ear. I was standing in my kitchen, next to the stove where I had been stirring a pot of greens for my supper. The steam rose up from the pot. I watched it rise. I watched it disappear into the air. She doesn't understand boundaries. I'll handle it. I hung up the phone very gently. I did not slam it down. I did not throw it across the room. I set it on the counter next to the stove, and I turned off the burner under the greens, and I walked into the living room, and I sat down in Harold's old recliner. I sat there for a long time. I want to describe to you exactly what I felt, because I think there are women listening to this who have felt it too, and I want them to know they are not alone. What I felt was not heartbreak. Heartbreak is loud. Heartbreak is tears and a racing heart. This was quieter than that. It was the feeling of something being confirmed. The feeling of a suspicion you had been carrying around in your body for years finally being put into words by somebody else. The feeling of finally understanding, with absolute clarity, what you already knew. My son was not too busy to call me. My son was avoiding me, and his wife was helping him avoid me. And they both believed they were doing the right thing. That was the part that made it unbearable. They were not bad people. They were people who had convinced themselves that protecting their little family from their aging, intrusive mother was a kind of moral victory. They were the good guys in the story they told themselves. And I was an obstacle, an obligation, a problem to be managed. I sat in Harold's recliner, and I watched the evening light move across the wall, and I thought about all the checks I had written over the years. $12,000 for the hospital, $4,000 for the landscaping, $600 for Amara's preschool deposit. I thought about the kente cloth. I thought about the doll under the couch. I thought about every Sunday dinner I had driven to, every voicemail I had left, every time I had said I just wanted to check in on y'all. I had been paying. For years. I had been paying for something I thought was love, but it wasn't love. It was access. I was paying to be let in. I was paying to still count. And the people I was paying had decided, somewhere along the way, that the price wasn't high enough, that I was too much, that loving me was an inconvenience. I did not cry. I sat in that chair until it was dark outside. Then I got up, and I went into the kitchen, and I scraped the burned greens into the trash, and I washed the pot, and I went to bed. I did not call Darius back. I did not tell him about the furnace. I called a repairman on Monday morning. He came out on Tuesday and fixed it for $240. When Darius finally called me on Thursday, 4 days later, to ask about the furnace, I said, "Oh, I took care of it, baby, no trouble." He said, "Okay, Mama. Sorry I didn't get back to you sooner. Crazy week." I said, "That's fine, baby." And it was fine. It had to be fine. Because I had just learned the only lesson that mattered. If I wanted to survive the rest of my life with any dignity at all, I was going to have to stop asking. Thanksgiving came the next week. I told you already what happened at Thanksgiving. The pie, the kitchen, the powder room. I will not go through it again. But I want to tell you what I did that night, after I came home. I got home at 9:30. The house was dark. I had left one light on in the kitchen, the way Harold used to do when I came home late from a teacher's meeting. I took off my good shoes at the door. I hung up my coat. I poured myself a glass of water, and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I looked around the room I had lived in for 47 years. The blue ceramic coffee pot on the counter, the cross-stitched kitchen towel Harold's mother had made us in 1977, the magnet on the refrigerator from our trip to Savannah in 1998, the only real vacation we ever took, the picture of Darius on the wall, high school graduation, him in his green cap and gown, me and Harold on either side of him, all three of us smiling like we had won the lottery. I looked at that picture for a long time. Then I got up, and I went upstairs, and I opened the drawer of my vanity where I kept my jewelry, and I took out the thin gold chain Harold had given me on our 30th anniversary. I held it in my hand. I thought about everything it meant. I thought about the woman I had been the day he put it around my neck. I thought about the woman I was now. Then I put it back in the drawer, and I went to bed, and I did not cry. I lay there in the dark, and I thought, Gloria, you have to decide something. You have to decide whether you are going to keep dying slow, a little every year until there is nothing left of you, or whether you are going to do something different. I didn't know what different looked like. I fell asleep without knowing. The magnolia tree did not bloom that April. I want to tell you about this carefully, because it is the moment everything changed, and I need you to feel it the way I felt it. It was a Tuesday morning in early April 2026. I was 70 years old. I had been watching that tree for 47 Aprils. Harold had planted it in 1977. It had bloomed every single year, every year without fail. White blossoms the size of my hand. You could smell it from the driveway. Every April, I would step out onto the porch in my nightgown with my cup of coffee, and I would stand there, and I would whisper, "Good morning, Harold." That Tuesday, I woke up at 5:30, as I always did. I put on my housecoat. I went downstairs. I filled the blue ceramic pot with water. I spooned in the coffee. The Maxwell House my mother always used, the same kind I had been buying since 1974. I stood at the counter and I waited for it to brew, and when it was done, I poured myself a cup, and I walked through the living room to the front door, and I opened it, and I stepped out onto the porch. The tree had no blossoms, not one. I stood there in my housecoat with my coffee in my hand, and I looked at that tree, and at first I thought I was seeing it wrong. I thought my eyes were bad. I put down my coffee on the porch rail, and I walked down the steps in my house slippers, and I went over to the tree, and I put my hand on its trunk. The tree was not dead. The bark was firm. The branches were green at the tips. There were buds, small and tight and unopened, but they were not going to open. I could tell. I don't know how I could tell. A woman who has watched a tree for 47 years knows when it is not going to bloom. I stood there with my hand on that tree for a long time, and I understood something. The tree was tired. It had bloomed every year for 47 years, through droughts and ice storms and one hurricane, and the construction of the new sidewalk that had damaged its roots in 1994. It had bloomed through Darius's childhood. It had bloomed the year I almost died from pneumonia in 2002. It had bloomed the April after Harold's funeral, when I thought I would not survive. Every single year, no matter what, that tree had given me its flowers. And this year, it had nothing left to give. I sat down on the front steps, in my housecoat, at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I put my face in my hands, and for the first time in 9 years, since the day I buried my husband, I cried. Not delicate crying, not the kind of crying a lady does in a powder room. I cried the way a woman cries when something inside her breaks clean through. I cried loud enough that Tanya Brooks, my next-door neighbor, the young nurse who worked the night shift at Grady, came out onto her porch in her pajamas and walked across the grass to me and sat down beside me and put her arm around my shoulders and did not say a single word. She sat with me for maybe 20 minutes. When I finally stopped crying, she said, "Miss Gloria, you want me to walk you inside?" I said, "Thank you, baby. I can walk myself." She said, "You sure?" I said, "I'm sure." She said, "You call me if you need anything. Anytime, day or night." I said, "I will." She went back to her house. I went back to mine. I closed the door behind me. I stood in the front hall, and I looked at myself in the mirror Harold had hung there in 1980. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her hair was gray. Her face was lined. Her eyes were red from crying. She was wearing a housecoat that had been washed so many times the pattern had almost disappeared. And she looked like a woman who had spent 70 years being useful to everybody except herself. A woman who had given everything she had to people who did not notice when she stopped giving. A woman who was running out of blossoms. I said out loud to that woman in the mirror, "Gloria, honey, it's time." I did not know what I meant by it. Not yet. But something had shifted. A door had opened somewhere inside me, and I knew I was going to have to walk through it. I went upstairs. I went into the bedroom Harold and I had shared for 47 years. I sat down at his old roll-top desk, the one he had bought at an estate sale in 1986 and refinished himself one summer. I had not opened the drawers of that desk since he died. I had not been able to. I opened the top drawer. Inside was an envelope, cream-colored, craft paper, my name written on the front in Harold's handwriting. "Glory, open when you need." My hands started to shake. I did not know when he had put it there. I did not know why I had never seen it before. In 11 years of living in this house alone. Maybe I had seen it and refused to see it. Maybe I had not been ready. But I was ready now. Something had brought me to this desk on this morning. The tree, the crying, the face in the mirror. Something. I picked up the envelope. It was thick. There was something inside besides paper. I sat down on the edge of our old bed, and I held the envelope in my lap, and I whispered, "Harold, baby, what did you leave me?" Then I opened it. The envelope had 2 things inside it. The first was a letter, 4 pages long, written on the cream-colored stationery Harold used to buy at the drugstore on Cascade Road. He had written it in pencil, which was the way he wrote anything important. He said pen was for people who never made mistakes, and he was not one of those people. The letter was dated July 12, 2015, 3 months before he died. 3 months before he stood up from the kitchen table and told me something wasn't right. I sat on the edge of our bed, and I unfolded those 4 pages, and I read my husband's voice for the first time in almost 11 years. "My Glory, if you are reading this, it means you went looking through my desk, which means something is wrong. I knew this day would come. I am sorry I am not there to hold your hand through it, but I am going to try to hold it from wherever I am. Baby, I have been watching you for 40 years. I have watched you give. I have watched you pour yourself out for everybody. For your mama when she was dying. For your students every year. For Darius every day of his life. For me every minute of ours. You do it so natural that nobody notices, not even you. You think this is what love is. You think love is making yourself small so other people can be big. I want you to listen to me now, Glory. Listen the way you listened the first day I walked up to you at that church picnic. I need you to hear me. Love is not disappearing. Love is standing in the room and saying, "Here I am." Love is having a place that belongs to you and inviting the people you love into it. Love is knowing your own name. I have watched you forget your name, baby. A little every year. You don't see it. You think you are being a good wife and a good mother. But you are trading yourself away one piece at a time. And when you are done trading, there will be nothing left of the woman I fell in love with. And I cannot stand the thought of you disappearing. So I am going to do something now while I still can. I am going to buy you a house. You don't know this yet, but I have been saving for 10 years. I had a second account at the credit union. I put a little in every month out of my bonus checks. I did not tell you because you would have said it was unnecessary, and then you would have given the money to Darius for something. That is who you are, and I love you for it. But I needed to do this one thing behind your back, because I love you more than I love being honest about every dollar. The house is in Savannah, on East Jones Street in the Historic District. It is small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a little courtyard in the back with a live oak tree. I saw it on a weekend I told you I was visiting my brother. I made the offer on a Tuesday. I paid cash. It is in your name only. The papers are in this envelope. Glory, this house is not an investment. It is not for Darius. It is not for anybody's future, but yours. I am asking you to promise me something. I am asking you to promise that when the time comes, and you will know when it comes, you will go there. You will take your coffee pot and your records and your grandmother's Bible, and you will go to Savannah, and you will remember who Gloria Whitfield is. You are not just somebody's wife. You are not just somebody's mother. You are not just somebody's grandmother. You are a woman, a whole woman, made by God for your own reasons, not just for the uses other people find for you. I will be waiting for you wherever I am. But not yet, baby. Not yet. You have a lot of living left to do. Go do it. All my love, forever and after, Harold. The second thing in the envelope was the deed. A white house on East Jones Street in Savannah, Georgia. Paid for in full. In my name. Gloria Rose Whitfield. Sole owner, free and clear. I read that letter 3 times. I read it out loud on the 3rd time because I wanted to hear his voice saying the words. Then I folded it up, and I put it back in the envelope, and I held the envelope against my chest, and I rocked back and forth on the edge of our bed like I was holding a baby. He had known. 11 years ago, he had known. He had watched me for 40 years, and he had seen what was coming. And he had quietly, without any fuss, bought me a place to land when I finally fell. I do not know how to explain what that did to me. I am not sure there are words for it. All I can tell you is that I stopped crying, and I stood up, and I walked to my closet, and I pulled down my largest suitcase from the top shelf, and I started to pack. I did not tell Darius. I did not tell Vanessa. I did not leave a note. I told Ruth. Ruth Fairweather had been my best friend since 1968, when we sat next to each other in Mrs. Carter's 10th grade algebra class at Lucy Laney High School in Macon. She had stood next to me at my wedding. She had stood next to me at Harold's funeral. She had been the first person I called when Darius was born, and the last person I called when my mother died. Ruth was 71 years old and still drove a 2009 Cadillac that she refused to replace, and she could see through me faster than anybody else alive. I called her the morning after I read Harold's letter. I said, "Ruthie, I am going to Savannah for a while." She said, "How long is a while?" I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "Does Darius know?" I said, "No, and I'm not going to tell him. I need you to keep an eye on the house, and if he calls you looking for me, you tell him I am safe and I am fine, and I will call him when I'm ready." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Gloria Whitfield, I have been waiting 30 years for you to do something like this." I said, "Ruthie." She said, "Baby, I love you. You go to Savannah. I will feed your plants. I will take in your mail. I will lie to your son if you need me to. You go." I packed 3 suitcases. I took the blue ceramic coffee pot my mother had given me in 1974. I took the Aretha Franklin records I hadn't played in 9 years because I was afraid the sound of gospel music would break me open. I took my grandmother's Bible, the one she had written in with a pencil in the margins in 1941, passages underlined where she had needed strength. I took Darius's kindergarten drawing out of the shoebox, and the handmade mermaid doll I had made for Amara, and a photograph of Harold sitting on our front porch in the summer of 2012, laughing at something I had said. I left everything else behind. I drove to Savannah on a Thursday morning in the middle of April, 4 hours on I-16, through the pine flats and the small towns and the historical markers for battles that happened 160 years ago. I drove with the windows down. I played Aretha the whole way. I sang along, out loud, by myself in the car, for the first time in 9 years. I arrived in Savannah at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The house on East Jones Street was smaller than I had imagined. Pale yellow clapboard, a red front door, a wrought iron gate leading into a little courtyard where a live oak tree, older than both of my grandparents combined, spread its branches across the sky like a cathedral. There was Spanish moss hanging from the branches. There were tiny white flowers blooming in the brick cracks. I stood at the gate with the key in my hand, and I whispered, "Harold, I'm here, baby." I went inside. The first week I cried a lot. I will not lie about that. I cried because the house smelled like nobody had lived in it. I cried because Harold had bought it for me and never seen me walk through its rooms. I cried because the kitchen had a window that looked out onto the live oak tree, and I kept imagining him standing there, making me coffee, looking out at that tree, knowing he would not be there to drink it with me. But somewhere in the middle of that first week, I started to do something I had not done in a long time. I started to listen to the quiet. In my house on Peachtree Street, the quiet had felt like absence. It had felt like the sound of nobody coming home. It had felt like the phone not ringing and the driveway staying empty and the seat at the table that nobody was going to sit in. In this house, the quiet felt like space. I sat on the little screened porch in the back courtyard on my second morning with a cup of coffee from my blue ceramic pot, and I watched a cardinal land on the branch of the live oak. The cardinal sat there for maybe 10 minutes. It did not want anything from me. It did not need me to be useful. It just sat there, being a cardinal, and I sat there, being a woman, and we shared the morning. That is the first time in years I can remember feeling like I was allowed to exist without earning it. I started walking. Every morning at 7, I walked around Chippewa Square and Monterey Square and Forsyth Park in slow circles, learning the names of the streets: Liberty, Harris, Macon, Gaston. I walked past houses where other people were living their own lives, and I did not wonder what they thought of me. I walked past the river where the container ships were coming in from the ocean. I walked past the gullah basket weavers selling sweetgrass baskets in the shade of the old live oaks, their hands moving into rhythm older than any of us. I stopped one morning at a woman's stand. Her baskets were the most beautiful things I had ever seen. Coiled sweetgrass, bound with palmetto, woven by hand in a pattern her ancestors had brought from West Africa in the hold of a slave ship. I stood there looking at them for a long time. The woman was about my age, maybe a little older. She looked up at me and she said, "You all right, sister?" I said, "I'm all right. These are beautiful." She said, "My grandmother taught me, and hers taught her, all the way back." I said, "My grandmother taught me to sew." She said, "You still sew?" I said, "Not like I used to." She said, "Why not?" I stood there with her sweetgrass baskets between us, and I thought about the question. Why had I stopped sewing? I used to sew every day. I used to make my own dresses, my own curtains, quilts for everybody I loved. I had stopped, I realized, standing there on that sidewalk, because nobody had asked me to make anything in a long time. And I had been making things for other people for so long that I had forgotten you could make things for yourself. I bought one of her baskets. I paid her $45 for it. I told her my name. She said, "I'm Henrietta. You come back, Gloria. I'll be here Tuesday and Friday." I came back. Every Tuesday and every Friday, not to buy more baskets, to sit with Henrietta under the live oak and learn how to weave them. The second week I was in Savannah, I started going to church. I had been a Baptist my whole life. The First African Baptist Church in Atlanta had been my church for 45 years. I had stopped going regularly after Harold died because the pews we used to sit in together were too empty without him, and the hymns we used to sing were too loud in a room where his voice was missing. In Savannah, I walked into the First African Baptist on Franklin Square on a Sunday morning. I sat in the back row. I did not know anybody. Nobody knew me. The choir sang "Great is Thy Faithfulness," and the pastor, a tall man about my age with silver hair and a gentle face, preached about the book of Ruth. The sermon was about what it means to start over, what it means to walk into a country you have never lived in and say your people will be my people, what it means to choose a new home when the old one is no longer yours. I cried in that back row, quietly, the way my mother had taught me to cry in church, into a handkerchief, with dignity. After the service, the pastor stood at the front door shaking hands with everybody. When I got to him, he held my hand in both of his, and he said, "Sister, I don't believe we've met. I'm Jeremiah Caldwell. Are you visiting us today?" I said, "My name is Gloria Whitfield. I just moved to Savannah." He said, "Well, Sister Whitfield, I hope you'll come back. We would be glad to have you." I said, "I believe I will." I came back the next Sunday, and the Sunday after that. Pastor Caldwell remembered my name the second time. By the third time, he knew I took my coffee black, and I liked the hymn, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand," the best, and he made sure the choir sang it the fourth Sunday I was there. He lost his wife to cancer 6 years ago. He told me about her one afternoon when I stayed after service to help fold bulletins. Her name was Eunice. She had been a librarian. They had been married for 42 years. He said, "Grief is a country you don't expect to live in, Sister Whitfield. And then one day you look up and you realize you've been there for a while." I said, "Yes, that is exactly what it is." He said, "But it's not the only country. There's others." I did not answer that. Not yet. But I thought about it for a long time after I went home. In my third week, Henrietta invited me to a writing group. It was called the Sweetgrass Writers. It was a group of 7 black women, all over 60, who met every Thursday afternoon at the public library on Bull Street. They wrote essays and poems and small memoirs. They read them out loud to each other. They gave each other feedback, and sometimes they laughed, and sometimes they cried, and sometimes they sat in silence together because some things don't need words. I went the first time because Henrietta made me. I sat in the back. I did not read anything. I listened to a woman named Frances Mayfield read a piece about her father's funeral, and I listened to a woman named Doris Waters read a piece about her first husband, and I listened to a woman named Coretta Delaney read a piece about teaching herself to drive at the age of 24 because her husband refused to let her. Coretta Delaney was a small woman with silver glasses and a voice like honey poured slow over hot cornbread. She was 78 years old. She was a retired history professor from Spelman College. She had written 6 books. When she finished reading, she sat down next to me and she said, "I don't believe we've met. I'm Coretta." I said, "I'm Gloria Whitfield." She looked at me. She blinked slowly. She said, "Whitfield. Gloria Whitfield, were you a teacher?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. 38 years, 3rd grade. Booker T. Washington Elementary in Atlanta." She put her hand on my arm. Her hand was small and soft and warm. She said, "Mrs. Whitfield, you were my 3rd grade teacher in 1972. I looked at her. She was 78 years old. If she had been in my 3rd grade class in 1972, she would have been, I did the math in my head, slowly, 9 years old. I would have been 17. No, that wasn't right. I did the math again. Coretta saw me doing the math. She laughed a little. She said, "Oh, sweetheart, I started school late. I was 25 in your classroom. I was doing the adult education program. They put me in your class because I couldn't read. I couldn't read a word. I stared at her. She said, "You don't remember me. I was nobody. I was a black woman from the country who had been pulled out of school at 12 to work in the fields. I was 25 years old, and I was sitting in a classroom full of 9-year-olds trying to learn how to read The Cat in the Hat. I was ashamed every single day. I thought about quitting every single day." I said, "Coretta." She said, "You wrote something in my reading notebook. I still have it. I have kept it in my dresser drawer for 54 years. Do you want to know what you wrote?" I could not speak. I nodded. She said, "You wrote, Coretta, you have an important voice. Keep going." She reached into her purse. She pulled out a small, worn notebook with a blue cover. The pages were yellow with age. She opened it to a page near the front, and she handed it to me. My handwriting. Younger. Looped the way I used to loop my letters in the 70s. In pencil. "Coretta, you have an important voice. Keep going." I read it 3 times. Coretta said quietly. I kept going. I finished the reading program. I got my GED at 28. I went to community college at 30. I got my bachelor's at 36. I got my PhD at 49. I taught history at Spelman for 30 years. I wrote 6 books. I have grandchildren who think I have always been Dr. Delaney. She took the notebook back. She closed it gently. She held it in her lap. She said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I was going to quit school the day you wrote that. I had decided. I was going to walk out of the classroom and never come back. And then you handed me my notebook, and I read what you had written, and I did not walk out. Because a teacher, a black woman teacher, like me, from a place like mine, had looked at me and said I had a voice that mattered. I have been living off that sentence for 54 years. I started crying, right there in the public library on Bull Street. Not quiet crying, not dignified crying. The kind of crying where your shoulders shake and you cannot catch your breath. Coretta put her arms around me, and she held me while I cried, and she did not tell me to calm down, and she did not apologize for making me cry. She just held me. When I could speak again, I said, "Coretta, I have spent the last 9 years believing I was invisible. I have spent the last 9 years believing I did not matter to anybody. I have spent the last 9 years waiting for my son to see me, and grieving because he doesn't, and thinking that meant my whole life had been a waste." Coretta said, "Mrs. Whitfield, look at me." I looked at her. She said, "You have never been invisible. You have been looking in the wrong direction." That night I sat at the little desk in my Savannah bedroom, and I wrote in my journal for the first time in 40 years. I wrote until 2 in the morning. I wrote about Coretta. I wrote about the magnolia tree. I wrote about Harold's letter. I wrote about all the children I had taught, whose names I had forgotten, who were walking around somewhere in the world carrying pieces of me they didn't know they had. I had taught, by my count, more than 1,000 children over 38 years, 1,000 third graders. Some of them must be doctors now. Some of them must be grandparents. Some of them must still be alive, and some of them must be gone, and all of them had sat in my classroom and heard my voice and been told by me that they mattered. I had built a life, a whole enormous life, and I had let one person, my son, decide whether that life had been worth anything. I had let one person hold the verdict over my head for 9 years, and he had not even known he was holding it. He had been too busy with his own life to pass the judgment I kept waiting for. I was not invisible. I had just been looking at the one person who couldn't see me, and I had forgotten to look at everybody else. Darius called me on a Wednesday. The 5th week I was in Savannah. Ruth had finally told him where I was. He had been calling her for 3 weeks, and she had been telling him I was safe and I would call him when I was ready. But he had pushed her, and she had pushed back for as long as she could, and finally she called me and said, "Gloria, he is about to come looking for you. I think it's time." So I answered when he called. I said, "Hello, son." He said, "Mama." His voice was different, smaller. I had not heard that voice since he was maybe 15 years old, the night he had to tell me he had wrecked his father's car. He said, "Mama, I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't even know exactly what I'm apologizing for. But I know I did something, and I know you left because of it." I was sitting in my courtyard. The live oak was above me. The cardinal was on the branch. It was 5 in the afternoon, and the light was golden, and the Spanish moss was moving a little in the breeze coming off the river. I said, Darius, you did not do anything wrong exactly. You forgot me. That is different from doing something wrong. You cannot do wrong to a mother you have stopped seeing. He said, Mama, that's not, I didn't. I said, son, listen to me. I am not angry. I want you to hear me clearly. I am not angry, and I am not going to punish you, and I am not going to make you pay for the last 9 years. That is not what this is about. This is not about you at all. He said, what is it about? I said, it is about me. It is about me deciding that I would rather live the rest of my life in a small yellow house in Savannah as a whole woman than live the rest of it in a big house in Atlanta as a ghost waiting to be noticed. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing. He said, Are you moving? Permanently? I said, I am living here. I don't know if permanently is a word that means anything at my age, but for now, this is where I am. This is where I'm going to be. He said, Can I come see you? I said, Yes, you can come see me. But I want you to understand something, Darius. You are welcome here, but this house is mine. Your father bought it for me. He bought it for me because he knew 11 years ago that I was going to need a place to come home to that was not built around being somebody's mother. And I am asking you to respect that. When you come as a grown man visiting his mother, not as a son who needs something. Do you understand what I am telling you? He said, Yes, Mama, I understand. He was quiet again. Then he said, Daddy bought you that house? I said, Yes. He said, He never told me. I said, He never told anybody. It was mine. He said, Mama, I don't know what to say. I said, You don't have to say anything, baby. You just have to come when you come, and bring Amara sometimes if Vanessa will let you, and let me be your mother when I am your mother, and let me be Gloria when I am Gloria. He said, Okay, Mama. He said, I love you. I said, I love you too, son. And then I hung up, and I sat in the courtyard, and the cardinal flew off, and I watched the sky turn from gold to pink to dark blue, and I felt, for the first time in maybe 40 years, that I had said the thing I meant to say, to the person I meant to say it to, in the tone I meant to say it in, and that it had been heard. Vanessa came 2 weeks later. I did not expect her. I expected Darius first. But it was Vanessa who showed up at my front gate on a Saturday morning at 11 o'clock alone in jeans and a sweatshirt I did not think she owned, with a small cardboard box in her hands, and her face looking like she had not slept in a week. I opened the gate. I said, Vanessa. She said, Mom Whitfield, can I come in? I stepped aside. I led her through the courtyard and into the kitchen. I put the kettle on. I did not say anything. She sat at my little kitchen table, and she put the cardboard box in front of her, and she stared at her hands. She said, I don't know how to start. I said, Start anywhere. She said, Amara found your jewelry box. I looked at her. She said, In the hall closet. You left it behind when you went. She was looking for something else, and she pulled it down and it fell open. There was a necklace inside, a gold chain. She asked me whose it was. I said it was her Nana's. She said, Where did Nana go? And I said I didn't know. And she said, Why did Nana go? Vanessa's hands were shaking. She said, I didn't have an answer for her. I stood in the hallway with that necklace in my hand, and I didn't have an answer for my daughter. And I realized I had taken something away from her. I had taken her grandmother away from her. I had done that. Not you, me. I did not say anything. I poured the tea. She said, Mom Whitfield, I grew up with a mother who did not like her mother-in-law. My grandmother was a country woman from Alabama who embarrassed my mother. My mother never invited her to things. My mother rolled her eyes when she came to visit. My mother said she was old-fashioned and pushy and didn't respect boundaries. I watched my mother do that for 20 years. And I did the same thing to you. I did not mean to. I did not think I was doing it. But I was. I was copying a script I did not even know I had learned. I set her tea in front of her. I sat down across from her. She said, I am not here to ask you to come back to Atlanta. I know you are not coming back. I am here because my daughter is 6 years old and she is about to grow up. And I do not want her to grow up thinking that her grandmother was a woman you threw away. I want her to know you. I want her to visit you. I want her to learn the songs you know. I want her to eat your cornbread. I want her to hear the stories about her great-great-grandfather walking 40 miles to vote. I cannot give her back the years I took, but I can stop taking. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red. She said, "I am sorry. I am so sorry, Mom Whitfield. I know sorry does not give you back those years, but I am still sorry." I looked at this woman, my daughter-in-law, 39 years old. I had known her for 12 years. I had never in all that time heard her voice sound the way it sounded right then. I said, "Vanessa, thank you for coming." She started to cry. I said, "What's in the box?" She wiped her face. She opened the box. Inside were things she had collected from my house. My jewelry box, a photograph of Harold and me at our 30th anniversary, a small quilt I had made when Amara was a baby that I had left folded in the guest room closet, the kente cloth I had given them at their wedding, carefully folded, protected in tissue paper. She had kept the kente cloth. She said, "I couldn't find it for years. I thought we had lost it in a move. I found it last month. It was in a box in the attic. It had never even been unpacked from the wedding." She pushed the cloth across the table toward me. She said, "This is yours. It was always yours. I did not know what it was when you gave it to me. I know now. I am giving it back because it does not belong in a box in my attic. It belongs where you are." I took the cloth. I held it in my lap. I ran my hand over the gold thread. Our initials, D and V, embroidered in the corner by my own hand in 2017. I said, "Vanessa, I am not going to forgive you all at once. I don't think forgiveness works that way. But I am going to let you come back. And I am going to let Amara come back. And we are going to see what we can build from here." She nodded. She could not speak. I said, "Drink your tea, baby. It's getting cold." It has been a year now. A year since the magnolia tree did not bloom. A year since I read Harold's letter. A year since I drove 4 hours to a yellow house on East Jones Street and started over. This spring, Ruth sent me a picture. The magnolia in front of my old house on Peachtree Street is blooming again. White blossoms the size of a woman's hand. She said she counted them. 47 blossoms. The same number as the years Harold had been gone. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think trees know things. But I am not there to see it. I am here. And the live oak in my courtyard has its own kind of beauty. It does not bloom. It just keeps being, year after year, a quiet shade over a quiet woman who is finally sitting in her own life. Amara comes every other weekend now. Vanessa drives her down. Sometimes Vanessa stays. Sometimes she goes to a hotel and picks Amara up on Sunday. Amara calls me Grandma now. She asked me to. She said Nana was a little kid's name and she was not a little kid anymore. I said, "Okay, baby." I said, "Whatever you want to call me is what you should call me." Darius came last month. He stayed for 4 days. He slept in the guest room. He helped me fix the back fence. He sat on the porch with me in the evenings and did not say very much, which was always his way, and which I was glad to remember. On the last night, he said, "Mama, I want to come down more often. Just me sometimes. Is that okay?" I said, "Yes, son, that is okay." He said, "I miss you." I said, "I miss you too, baby." And I did. I do. But missing is different from needing. I do not need him anymore to make my life mean something. I needed him for 42 years. I don't need him for the rest. Pastor Caldwell and I have started taking walks on Saturday mornings, around Forsyth Park. He brings coffee from the shop on the corner. I do not know yet what that is. I am 71 years old. I am not in a hurry to know. Some things are allowed to just be what they are. Coretta and I write together every Thursday. I read out loud now. My voice still shakes sometimes. That is okay. Henrietta is teaching me to weave sweetgrass baskets. I am not very good yet. That is also okay. I want to tell you something. If you have listened to me all this way, I want to tell you one thing, and then I will let you go. There is a woman somewhere listening to this. Maybe you, maybe somebody you love. She is sitting in a kitchen somewhere holding a pie nobody is going to eat. She is waiting for a phone to ring that isn't going to ring. She is watching her grandbabies call somebody else grandma while she smiles and tells herself it is fine. I want her to know something. I want her to know that she is not invisible. I want her to know that the fact that the one person she is looking at cannot see her does not mean she cannot be seen. There is a whole world of people waiting to see her. There is a life waiting for her. There are old students she has forgotten. There are strangers in churches she has not walked into yet. There are live oak trees in cities she has not visited that are waiting to shade her. You are not just somebody's mother. You are not just somebody's wife. You are not just somebody's grandmother. You were a whole woman before you were any of those things, and you will be a whole woman when all of those things are over. Harold wrote me that in a letter in 2015. It took me 11 years to read it. Don't let it take you 11 years. I don't know exactly when I came back to myself, but one morning I woke up in Savannah and the coffee tasted right again, and I knew I was home. Not the house I built for them, but the woman I built for me. I stopped paying for my own silence the day I remembered my name. My name is Gloria Rose Whitfield, and I am still here.